the first architect we'll talk about, and that is an exceptional Egyptian. Now, when I say an exceptional Egyptian, you might say you'll probably talk about the creators of the Luxor temples or the pyramids and so on. No, this is a 20th century Egyptian. And a very important architect. Although, as opposed to many architects, a very modest one. Although he was an aristocrat. So, Hassan Fathy, 1989. So he was born when the 19th century ended and when the 20th century began. Hassan Fathy, you see, he was born not on the 25th of March, but 23rd of March. Unfortunately, on my list of with names to celebrate, for some reason, he appeared, on the day of March 25th. But I double checked, and he was born on March 23rd. We are 2 days late, but better later than never. Was a noted Egyptian architect who pioneered appropriate technology for building in Egypt, especially by working to reestablish the use of adobe and traditional mud construction, as opposed to Western building designs, material configurations, and layouts. Fathy was recognized with the Aga Khan Chairman's Award for Architecture in 1980. In 2017, Google celebrated Fathy with a Google Doodle for pioneering new methods in architecture, respecting tradition, Egyptian heritage and tradition, and valuing all walks of life. You see, an architecture for people. But he published also intensely about this subject, like, for example, the book called Building for the Poor or Architecture for the Poor. Here he was. And what I admire a lot about this man is that, he was born rich, affluent. He was an aristocrat. But he worked for the least advantaged, for the least privileged, for the poor. And although he was dressed like, his condition required, his architecture is indeed for those who were not as lucky as he was. A very remarkable man, truly, Hassan Fathy. And I wish I knew myself more about him, but I have the desire to know more about him. And in my own way, I pay homage to him today. He was a modest visionary. That's what Hassan Fathy was. Who loved his country, who loved his countrymen, the Egyptians, and worked for them. Now, Fathy has been called Egypt's best-known architect since Imhotep. My God, this is quite a strong statement. Who was Imhotep? Imhotep was considered the first genius in history, in world's history, not just in Egypt. Imhotep was considered the first Leonardo da Vinci. Imhotep was the first architect, actually, in the history of architecture. Now, it's very possible there were other architects that we do not know of, but we do know of Imhotep because some documents came down to us. He was not just an architect, he was the grand vizier, the grand administrator, even the shaman, the medicine man for the king, Zoser, for the pharaoh Zoser. And Imhotep built the first pyramid ever built. It was the stepped pyramid of Saqqara. Why was it stepped? Because it was a beginning. Because from a flat desert, he gave birth to the first pyramid, and maybe at first rather hesitantly. That's why it is in steps. But a very, very moving monument from 5,000 years ago. Imhotep's stepped pyramid, Imhotep being the first architect. And how do we know of Imhotep? Well, apparently, or it is so, I myself saw an image with a hieroglyphic writing under the soul, under the foot of King Zoser. It was apparently a large statue, a statuary work, and Imhotep's name was mentioned at the very bottom, underneath the foot of the pharaoh. But he was mentioned, so that's why his name came down to us. And a few centuries after Imhotep died, he was deified by the Egyptians. So he is considered now, godlike. Not a little thing. Hassan Fathy was not godified, but was not sanctified. But as you can see, he's considered the best known architect since Imhotep. And look at his renderings. And when I look at these renderings, I am sad, actually, because I compare these renderings with many of the renderings of the present, because I see here an innocence which many of the renderings, the commercial renderings, there are so many of them in the present, do not have the innocence of his renderings. Plus, look at the in a way, the non-objectivity of the representation. Because in essence, we have a static image, an elevation, orthogonal, totally orthogonal, placed on a background which was in perspective, or so it appears. But I think that's why I'm a great adversary of linear perspective. I have great respect and admiration for Piero della Francesca and for Filippo Brunelleschi, for them giving birth to the linear perspective. But linear perspective does not work any longer for us in the 21st century. Why? Because in the 21st century, we have an infinity of points of reference. We don't have just three, 1, 2, or 3. No. We have an infinity. The world is a knot because of the web-like reality of our world. So, with all due respect, the linear perspective is not appropriate any longer for our time. Of course, we can still do it. Plus, there is something else. The perspective that Piero della Francesca and Filippo Brunelleschi generated or invented was the reaction, in a way, to the subjectivity and the so-called, in a way, yes, subjectivity and lack of objectivity of the perspective used by the medieval man. So they believed in control, because a linear perspective is about control. You control, so-called objectively, how a building, so-called scientifically, should look like, with 1 or 2 or 3 points of towards which all the lines converge. But that disappearance of subjectivity in the representation was also a loss. Here with Hassan Fathy, we see the return of a different kind of rendering, which scientifically is less correct, but emotionally perhaps is at least as relevant. And look also at this old rendering. This kind of representation, which is frontal, might appear too static for us, but the truth is, just like in a Zen garden, which doesn't have water running into what appears to be a rivulet, you add the water with your imagination. It's the same thing here. You just have a frontal depiction of various here is a little bit of perspective, if we are to call it so, but essentially the whole page It's frontal. Gone is the scientific Renaissance perspective. But for the imagination, I think it's richer because it allows you to imagine things, what is on the side, what is in the back, and so on. So it doesn't tell you everything, but exactly because of what appears to be a deficiency, you actually have a higher degree of freedom. Look at this, and we are talking about a very cultivated Egyptian architect. He was not ignorant of Piero della Francesca and Brunelleschi. No, we are talking about a well-trained, formally trained aristocrat architect. But look at the rendering. Look at the trees; they are horizontal. You will say, "What is this nonsense? How could he draw the trees horizontally?" It's fine. It's absolutely fine. It's the Western mind in the present will think, if I make the elevation, I cannot show the courtyard or the front yard in this way, and certainly I will not show the trees in this way. Why not? Why not? We are so rigid, we are so trapped in our so-called objectivism that we don't allow imagination to if necessary, even to turn things upside down. And look, what architect today would show birds flying like this? No architect. I laugh, but I should actually cry. Well, we just read that billions of birds die, because of the glass, that they hit the glass and they drop dead. Maybe if we begin again to draw birds on our renderings, maybe then we'll pay some attention to the birds, and not maybe, surely it will be a good thing for life on Earth. And also, instead of having parking lots and garage, here we have some birds, but different birds, walking birds, so to speak. And here we have some animals, of course, not at the scale they truly are, because the birds are as big as the animals, and the human being is not much bigger. But again, we don't need that guy. Almost felt like using an improper word, objectivism of today, our so-called scientific rendering. To hell with the scientific rendering. To me, this rendering is much more evocative. It evokes reality. Thus, it is not exhausting the richness of reality, it's only suggesting it. And being just suggested, you have the freedom to imagine and the joy to imagine what you want to imagine and not someone else. I think the impoverishment of architecture because of scientism and scientificism is huge. Because in the name of objectivity, we kill subjectivity, as if we human beings are just objective. Of course, we are not just objective. We also have emotions, no? We also have feelings. And as Ingmar Bergman said, in the field of emotions, we are all illiterates. Yes, illiterates. And the one who said so was probably the best film director ever, or one of them. He, in my opinion, he was the best. But again, are we listening to Ingmar Bergman? Of course not. Are we listening to emotions? Of course not. Are we listening to the leaves and flowers of the tree in the spring? Of course not. Are we listening to Hassan Fathy and his birds on the sky and the horizontal trees? Of course not. We ignore such people. We also ignore William Morris. Look at this beautiful rendering. Yes, we have a plan. Yes, we have the elevation, but then look what we have here. What is this? Where are the garages? Where are the parking lots? Where are the cars? Where are the tumultuous clouds in the sky and the beautiful young woman with a short skirt that seduces so many architects and so many so-called possible clients? They are not here because this man was not interested to sell in a vulgar way his work. And look at these birds here. Why did he place these birds here? Because birds are supposed to be on the sky, no? Even when, these are not really flying, but it's the idea of the bird. Why did he place a tree here? Because maybe he wanted in the plan to have a tree here. Now the plan is of course horizontal, but the tree is vertical. Wow, this man is mad. How could he show a tree vertically when the plane is horizontal? Why not? I mean, what's amazing is that we are years after Albert Einstein invented the theory of relativity, and we are still trapped in the very dogmatic view of the world. I love Hassan Fathy. I really do. Look at this. Look at, isn't Hassan Fathy meeting William Morris? I think he is. Look at this tree here, and look at this tree here. Architecture can be so beautiful if we banish the ridiculous dogmas that we find refuge behind. And look at this. Now, I don't know, this was animated by some modern technology, but in essence, this is a rendering by Hassan Fathy. This is Hassan Fathy here. Again, this mixture between animals and building, and why can't we show, in our plans also the human activities that are meant to be in those spaces and show them, as they happen? Why not? Look, like here, maybe someone is either cooking or looking at a laptop or something, although there seem to be some fruits, and we see how the wind blows through here, the ventilation, the cross ventilation. Again, he didn't do this animated rendering, but it is based on his graphic work. Isn't this about the joy of life? I think it is. And we cannot have joy of life being the prisoners of unbearable dogmas and conformisms and so on. Look, another beautiful rendering. Look at these trees. They're artistically beautiful. They don't need to be literal, objective representations of the tree. No, but they are richer like this. They are much richer, in my opinion. Now, I don't know if he did this. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Anyway, it's the same architect. So one of his first assignments after graduating in 1926 from what is now the University of Cairo was to build a school at Talca, a small town along the Nile in northern Egypt. The absolute squalor of the place haunted Fathy. The streets were littered with rotten food and filthy water. The buildings were dilapidated, and the peasants who lived there had accepted the depressing lot. This experience inspired him to improve the lives of those who were powerless to do so without help. Now we look at this school. Yeah, you might say, so what's so special? I think it is. First of all, it is a school in a place where maybe at that time not too many people went to school. Second, architecturally, it's not the least interesting space I looked at. And it was built for the poor and with very poor means. You can do, I'm convinced of it, you can do great architecture with lesser means. It's possible. You don't need, great affluence to do good architecture. It depends, though, what you mean by good architecture. I'm totally in opposition to what Francis Kere said, that everybody deserves luxury. I mean, yes, in a utopian world, maybe we should all have Cadillacs and red rugs and swimming pools and even fly to Mars with Elon Musk. But, it's something strident, in my opinion, to talk about luxury to people who don't even have water. And water is not a luxury, water is a necessity. So anyway, so Hassan Fathy was a cosmopolitan, sorry, I don't read because this is covered, trilingual professor, engineer, architect, amateur musician, dramatist, and inventor. Sounds, in a way, deja vu. Well, William Morris, no? So let's read again, because I wish there were here 200 students to hear this. Hassan Fathy was a professor, engineer, architect, amateur musician, dramatist, and inventor. He designed nearly 160 separate projects, from modest country retreats to fully planned communities with police, fire, and medical services, markets, schools, theaters, and places for worship and recreation. These communities including many functional buildings such as the laundry facilities, ovens, and wells. He utilized ancient design methods and materials, as well as knowledge of the rural Egyptian economic situation, with a wide knowledge of ancient architectural and town design techniques. He trained local inhabitants to make their own materials and build their own buildings. So just like William Morris, he had social concerns, because I think a true intellectual, a true artist, a true cultural figure cannot accept the injustices of the world. And it's only normal for them to fight for the cause of those less privileged, but not in order to give them luxuries. This is again my, I will stress this, but in order to create some balance in the world, not in the name of a superstructure or ideals which are in their essence actually, I would say, vulgar. Fathy gained international critical acclaim for his involvement in the construction of New Gurna, located on Luxor's west bank, built to resettle the village of Gurna, which fell within the archaeological areas of the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. Fathy's plan devised groundbreaking approaches to economic, social, and aesthetic issues that typically impact the construction of low-cost housing. With regard to the economic issues, Fathy noted that structural steel was not an apt choice for a poor country, and that even materials such as cement, timber, and glass did not make good economic sense. To address this issue, Fathy instead devised a plan that included the use of appropriate technology, notably mud brick construction. Noting that the traditional village, although afflicted with issues of overcrowding and poor sanitation, was also an expression of a living society in all its complexity, Fathy strived to design New Gurna in a manner that addressed the social concerns, including attempting to consult directly with every family in Gurna and advocating for the involvement of social ethnographers in the planning process. Despite this, inhabitants of the former village were not enthusiastic about relocating, which effectively cut them off from their existing livelihood of trading in archaeological finds. Just a second, traditional Nubian architectural design. Sorry, there is something hidden here. It's a problem with Zoom or with my laptop. With regard to aesthetic issues, Fathy placed emphasis on traditional Nubian architectural designs, which he observed in a 1941 trip to the region. Enclosed courtyards, vaulted roofing, yielding what Fathy described as spacious, lovely, clean, and harmonious houses. He also made use of traditional Nubian ornamental techniques, claustra, a form of mud lattice work, again, lattice, ornamental, as well as vernacular architecture techniques of the Gurna region. Some critics have observed, however, that Fathy's project for Gurna is not a superlative example of how to prioritize vernacular architecture in an urban plan, given that the domed architecture Fathy championed is traditionally used for funerary architecture rather than residential or domestic spaces. Well, that's what those critics thought. But I like to imagine that Fathy was right and perhaps better informed than they were. Well, I am a stranger to Egypt. I never traveled there. I only look at some images and I express my feelings, my thoughts. I like what I see, and I see architecture here. I see architecture. Now, if some critics think that there is a funeral aspect to it, I don't know. I don't see it. And even if it is, I mean, dome can be beautiful, and plus the relationship between life and death is a reality. So I'm not sure they were right. I mean, maybe they were right, but I don't see this as an inconvenient, aesthetically speaking. I think it's a great architecture, and it's done with mud bricks, with mud, not with concrete, not with steel, not with large surfaces of glass. It's an architecture that belongs to that place. We saw the rendering. It's quite a large village, as you can see, with narrow streets, and they all have these courtyards. I imagine that you don't have to be an Egyptian to like to live here. This is the power of architecture, whatever the critics might say, and sometimes they could be right, sometimes they could be wrong. But if you infuse a project with the intensity of your intuitions, of your talent, if you have generous social concerns, if you don't try to mimic mainstream architecture, you could arrive at something valuable. Maybe I'm just trying to imagine why those critics were, against the project. Maybe because most people are reluctant to see a possible relationship between the sacred and the profane, because it's much easier to separate them, right? The profane is on the left and the sacred is on the right, and they don't communicate. They are separated. So an architecture that tries to bring them together could be, difficult for some people. It's possible because even in terms of form, we are dealing with a square and a circle. So it's true that the circle or the sphere belong, conceptually to the sky, to heavens, to the above. To the otherness of the sacred, and the square of the cube belong to the earth. They are paradigms of the earth. So, in my opinion, what we look at here is a meeting between the sacred and the profane. If this irritates some critics, let them be. I'm on the side of Hassan Fathy. And it wasn't the critic who wrote the book, Building for the Poor. It was Hassan Fathy. Sorry about the resolution of these pictures. You see here fragmented, wall. It's okay. It's okay. It's part of life. You know, people have when they grow older, they have wrinkles. Well, these are in a way the wrinkles of an aging world. It's okay. Here there are some scars. You know, it's okay. It's part of life. I don't think this is or should be an issue. And again, as opposed to Francis Carey, this architect didn't think about luxuries. He was thinking about basics, and he gave to the people truly an elemental architecture, which I think is very beautiful. Aesthetically, for me, is very beautiful. It's coherent, it's logical, but it's also infused with the spirit of the place, and it's warm, it's affectionate. You know, in the site plan, a bird. Why did he place a bird on the site plan? And why is this not done in our schools of architecture? Just place a bird on the site plan if you identify with that bird in the sense that your spirit finds an adequate representation through that bird. I think a great architecture, even when it is deteriorated, you know, because of various reasons, the elements, even vandalism and so on, some of the nobility of its conception remains. And this is what, and I said this before, this is why Jaime Cantacuzino said the scattered columns at Persepolis, even if there are just fragments of those glorious past columns, for the spirit they are enough. And I would agree. And they're just fragments. Fathy designed the mosque and madrasa constructed with adobe at Dar al-Islam, an educational center near New Mexico, USA. The main buildings were completed in 1981 and Dar al-Islam opened in 1982. I don't know about this. I am a little bit uneasy about this because you know this architecture belonged to Egypt, where there were no such glorious trees. I mean, it's okay, of course, but it's a little bit mimicking because it is in the Brave New World. It's not any longer where it was supposed to be. So it's, you know, in exile, an architecture in exile. Maybe it should have changed. Maybe the building should have, had something of the spirit of the blue jeans. I mean, just try to imagine in front of this building, you know, a Cadillac. Would it work? I don't think so. But maybe I am rigid myself and dogmatic now. It's possible. Here, of course, there are some, it's still a warm, inspirational building, but you can tell that it's different from what we saw in Egypt. Although the architect was the same, this one is actually saw it before, and it's possible that this picture that initially I thought was from Egypt was actually from New Mexico. He built in the same way, but in a very different land, on very, in a very different culture, in a different country. Is this okay? Maybe to an extent, maybe, but is this still in New Mexico? It is. Well, of course, the interior is very beautiful and inviting and warm and other for New Mexico. But what does, I don't know, it's, well, maybe it's correct. I'm willing to reconsider what I said. No, the risk here is that you create an architecture for nostalgic reasons, which could dangerously approach the I don't know how to put it. It could fall into the category of an architecture that is complacent towards certain folkisms, if I am to call them so, mimicking tradition, because again, what would you do with such a building when in front of the building is a large red or not red Cadillac? Maybe even Pepsi Cola here, or again, maybe I think in an inspired dogmatic way is possible. Now, Luxor. This is a rather luxurious house in Luxor, in the proximity of the great temples there. He built a house for himself. Let's see how it looks like. I hope I have it here on this presentation. Sketches by Mr. Hassan Fathy. Hassan Fathy is the Middle East father of sustainable architecture. This is, what someone wrote. Another house in Fayoum, Egypt. New Baris village in Karga. No other project dominates this mature phase of the architect's work as much as the village of New Baris, in a way that is comparable to the notoriety of the new Gurna 20 years before. This remote and forbidding wilderness outpost designed by him, which is almost in the geographical center of Egypt, was planned to initially house 200 families, of which more than half were intended to be farmers and the remainder to be service personnel. His previous experience with such a project, and particularly his ability to build it inexpensively, made Fathy the logical choice as the architect for New Baris. And here it is, truly in the desert, a very noble and austere architecture. It's remarkable now to do with the simplest means something like this. Sorry about the Alami identification of the photograph. So this was built 20 years after he built that village that we initially saw, or that we saw before. It's interesting that this architecture totally gets rid of what Rem Koolhaas called the paraphernalia of protection. Now, being a homogeneous society, it's possible that it works. But you see, when you don't have a lot of properties, you don't have a lot of belongings, you don't have a lot of things that you have to protect and even hide away, you don't need keys. You don't even need doors. You don't need a so-called paraphernalia of protection. I think to have provokes many victims, because in the name of having, we complicate architecture a lot. The truth of the matter is, for in ancient times or older times, there was no need for something like this. But today, I know very well. Most people have countless keys, many keys, and many doors. And because we complicated our lives because of the obsession with having. Wouldn't it be? I remember when I arrived in the United States. It's also true I had nothing. I was totally poor, and I remain poor to this day. But at that time, I was the only one. In fact, a neighbor once told me, and I was living in Brooklyn, told me, "I notice you don't lock the door when you leave your house. In fact, you leave the door open. I mean, wide open." I said, "Yes. What's wrong with this?" Because I came from Romania, where I also had nothing, and I was not afraid of thieves, and there was nothing really to steal, or so I thought. Plus, I was young, no, very young, but uh, it's very, it's very refreshing actually not to have this fear. Did I lock the door? Just leave it open. And yes, I think it would be nicer to live in this way. But probably as required spirit of reality has to step in and correct matters. I guess. I don't know. Andre only residence in Cairo. Now I imagine is the edge of Cairo. Cairo is a huge city with a huge population, and here we see something else. But anyway, a house by Hassan Fathy. Well, I prefer the initial drawings and renderings that we looked at here. Of course, I mean, the most interesting part of this, graphically speaking, is the writing. Cairo, a fascinating country, of course. Shakira Meirez apartment in Cairo. For a short while, I stopped because I know a certain Shakira who is Egyptian, but this is a different Shakira. He designed the interior. They did an interior design for this person, and you are going to see pictures of it. Here it is, very cozy and comfortable and warm, with no need to mimic Western influences. Now, I'm not Egyptian, but I wouldn't mind at all living in such an apartment. No, I'm sure I would feel very comfortable there. Not just comfortable, but also inspired. Old furniture and old artifacts. Very nice. Hassan Fathy. I think a dog would have loved to sleep here. And it is said that where a dog loves to sleep is a home. That is, that the dog feels the warmth of a home, the genuineness of a home, and lowers itself on the floor and falls asleep, content. Yeah, maybe we could imagine such a test for the homeliness of a home. You know, we build it, we furnish it, and then we bring in a dog and see if the dog would just, you know, validate the quality of our work by falling asleep on the floor. The octagon, the magical octagon, which was also a preferred geometrical figure for Leonardo da Vinci. Since we talked about Imhotep, I mentioned the name of Leonardo. Let's now mention Leonardo in connection with the octagon. A ceramics factory in Kina, Egypt, a second community-oriented project that followed New Gurna at this time was a Jesuit-based crafts center located at Garagos, which was intended to improve the standard of living of the people in the village there. The plan for a ceramics factory, while deceptively low-tech in appearance, represents an extremely logical and efficient production diagram for the manufacture of pottery. A friend of mine from the United States actually told me about this not too long ago. Or was it about something else? I think it was actually about something else, the production of textiles. Or maybe they did ceramics too. I don't know. I have to ask him. But I think these arts and crafts, if we are to use the Victorian words for Egypt, are important, and they are important not just for Egypt or Victorian Great Britain, but also for other countries, including Romania, I would say, to invigorate the crafts. You know, it's even therapeutic to work with the hands. Although I'm not at all a practical man, but I would love to learn a craft, to work here, yes, in this very space by Hassan Fathy. It's so refreshing, you know, to see buildings without cars in the proximity, really, and to see buildings without garages and parking lots. God, I feel that, you know, the world is reborn, truly. Even, you know, buildings not surrounded by asphalt. Another house in Jordan. This house is an unusually fine example of Hassan Fathy's consistent care for residential space used for hospitality. The outside area, enclosed by arcades, is primarily given over to this function and balances well with the more private character of the interior. I don't know why. I guess that's all I have. I only have this image for this house in Jordan. You know, at the first sight, not very different from what we saw by him. And now we look at thinking the future. This is, you know, it's a website, Rethinking the Future. You can see many interesting works on that site, rethinkingthefuture.com. And now we look at his own house in Sidi Krier, Egypt, the Fatih house. In the house designed for himself in Egypt, the use of typologies and traditional forms is combined with influences from other cultures, transforming them in his style. The design of the house has noble sobriety, and the human size and all the pieces have been designed according to a symphony of forms and ideas, but also moods and materials. Fatih wanted the house to be a successful prototype of a low-cost structure all beautiful, but also model for tourist units. Here it is, the house of the architect. Not bad. When I look at these pictures, now, of course, I know it's in Egypt, but I think even if I didn't know, I have this feeling that this building was also about eternity. It's something about the silence of the walls, of the architecture, that makes it almost unavoidable not to think about eternity somehow. The the measurable the measurableness of time. Now maybe Strindberg was right, quoted by Ingmar Bergman in the movie Fanny and Alexander. Space and time do not exist. What about this? The architect today is mostly obsessed by space. Very rarely architects talk about time. But maybe Vito Acconci was right. Architecture is about time, not about space. Are we thinking about this? Not very often. Okay, thank you.